All right, so next up for our 90s definitive comedies is Wayne's World from 1992, starring Mike Myers and Dana Carvey and a myriad of other stars. I mean, people, household names, I would say.
There's a ton of guests. I would say starring Mike Myers and Dana Carvey with Tia Carrere and Rob Lowe, and then a host of guests, right?
Is that how you say her name? Tia Carrere?
Tia Carrere?
I'm asking you. I have no idea.
I always thought it was Tia Carrere or Tia Carrere.
It probably is. I don't know. I was just curious.
In my heart, she's Tia Carrere. And
yes.
I love her in my heart.
Mike.
As Mike Myers says, if she were president, she'd be Abraham Lincoln.
Right. From my childhood for this movie. So me and my sister Michelle were staying at our grandparents' house in Langsburg, Michigan when this came out on video. So I don't know, videos took forever. So it was probably like a year or two after this movie actually was released. And we went and we rented this movie, and my grandparents didn't really know what to make of it. And we put it on the TV and we were all watching it in the living room at my grandparents' house. And my grandpa shut this thing off 5 minutes in. Like, he was like, I don't know what the hell that was. That's trash. I don't know what, like he was furious that we had even like tried to watch. Yeah.
Was he like did he find something to be completely inappropriate? I'm trying to think, in the first 5 minutes they have the guy with the suck cut.
Like, right. I mean, like, I could say like, I gather like he probably would have thought it was really stupid.
Right.
And it was like, it's like the earliest 90s comedy I can think of that like started to go the way of like silly and stupid in a way that the 90s did,
Yeah.
But I mean, he was just so not having Wayne's World, and like we didn't even get to like Bohemian. Well, we might have gotten that far, but it was a quick on and off at my grandparents' house.
It's interesting. You mentioned, stylistically it felt 90s to you, because I would agree with that. Like, and maybe again, I'm no expert, but like as far as I can remember, this was what, 1992, February of 1992. It probably was an early tone setter of what I feel like later 90s slapstick comedies emulated in some way, with kind of the extreme characters. Not to say that there weren't movies with extreme characters that were, slapstick comedies for that. Thinking of movies like Fast Times at Ridgemont High and stuff with Spicoli, right? But like, this was like a movie where all the main characters were dialed up to 11 to a degree, or at least several of them. But this one, though, again, kind of like Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. A lot of the references are actually fully 80s. The characters themselves, the main characters, Wayne and Garth, are like trapped in their 80s adolescence. They're really not 90s. They're very 80s. Having said that, there are also very 90s references in the movie. Like, there are a couple of references that are very, very early 90s. And I feel like even though the characters and the themes were reflective of the 80s, this is one of those movies where I feel it informed the 90s from here out. Like, so many phrases and words and things they say, I feel like became part of the 90s lexicon. Now, again, I wasn't a teenager in the 80s, so maybe these were things kids said in the 80s. I don't know. But I can tell you that me personally, in my experience, me and my friends and around my house, we adopted a lot of these terms. And to me, they resonate with my 90s experience. Things like not, are you mental, get the net, hurl, spew, blow chunks, swing, babelicious, game on, a sphincter says what. These are things that like I feel like every teenager in the 90s knew these phrases, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so, but again, I can't really speak for the 80s in that regard. Ironically, my favorite of all the phrases they say is one that I don't remember really catching on in the 90s. Again, I could be wrong, but when they refer to his ex-girlfriend as a psycho hose beast, that just makes me laugh every time. And I don't know how that didn't become a more regular way to, like, describe a clingy girlfriend or something,
right? I mean, I obviously, like, I'm trying to avoid doing bits, but like the gun rack
Yep.
sequence. Like, just that whole sequence is like one of my favorite
Yes.
comedy bits of all time. Like, I absolutely love it. I crack up every time because
Yep.
it's such a well concocted scene that it's just like she's such a lunatic, and
Yes.
she's like bringing him this thing he could never use. Oh my god,
Well,
I
and
just love it.
I made a note about it later, but like their reaction every time Stacy comes around, who is played by
Mm,
I think Laura Flynn Boyle, right?
mm-hmm,
Uh,
yep.
every time she comes around, the looks on their faces are classic. And then, like you said, that whole sequence is like quintessential Wayne's World, right? They
Oh yeah.
nail it. It's so perfect. And again, it ends with, "Are you mental? Get the net. We broke up." Like it ends with
Right.
those like catchphrases that became, synonymous with Wayne's World and
Oh
Mike
yeah.
Myers, right? But yeah, I had mentioned the, kind of the look being very 80s. And so I had written down a lot of like the references and the cultural references being very firmly rooted in the 80s and even the 70s, because I think that's where their characters are supposed to be trapped in. But like right out of the gates, they're watching that, they're watching TV and they see the clapper, the Chia Pet, which actually
Oh
came
my
out of the 70s, but it still kind of feels 80s. There's references to Heather Locklear, who was a huge star in the 80s, though also the
god.
90s. Like she wasn't irrelevant.
Right.
The Grey Poupon bit that they do, that was a very 80s
That
commercial. It
one,
actually started in 1981.
see, like that bit, like I always remember, like, what the fuck is this? Like, that was what I thought when I watched, because
Mhm.
I'm like, what are they've got to be referencing something, and I have
Oh yeah,
no idea what it is.
and that is
And
actually a
that's
reference that I very much remember from TV as a kid, was those Great Poupon commercials. So I remember that in the movie, how funny it was, because it was like such a ubiquitous commercial, right? Like everybody, I feel like, knew that commercial.
Wait, did you
The
say "excuse me" baking powder when you were when you were going through
uh
your lines?
I should have. I definitely wrote it down. Did I skip
Okay.
that one?
I didn't remember if you said.
Because I
I couldn't pick
definitely
up
wrote
on
down "excuse me, baking powder" because
it.
I love that. Yeah, the Police Academy references, the Motley Crue and Van Halen shirts, the posters in Garth's room, Garth's dog. So anyway, lots of 80s references, though I did write down the Discman on the dashboard, as we were talking about in the last episode. Like
Oh my
having the
god.
CD player in your car was very 90s. The scene with Robert Patrick from Terminator 2 when he comes up as the
Hmm.
villain. But yeah, so that's kind of, me reflecting on its 90s relevance. But for the movie itself, I'll be very blunt. This is one of my all-time favorite movies. Like, I love this movie. I think it holds up. I
Hmm.
laughed hysterically the whole way through rewatching it, and it's one of those movies that I probably do watch every few years. I love Wayne's World. I always have. I always will. As I mentioned, Tia Career. So this I would have been 10 years old when this came out. But I don't know. I don't know if I realized it at the time, but definitely watching it now, like, she is so hot in this movie. Like, she's amazing. And maybe it's just the rock chick thing, and she's like on stage playing guitar and everything, which, by the way, that was actually her singing those parts.
Yeah,
I looked that
actually.
up. She
Yeah.
does all her own singing in it. And apparently she passed up an audition for Baywatch specifically to try and audition for this because she wanted it so bad. Things that I thought were unique in it as well. And this is, again, I'm not an expert, so I don't know, but was it common in comedies to break the fourth wall the way that Mike Myers
Oh
does in
no,
this
I don't
movie?
think
Or
so.
was this
I
kind of unique or novel at the time?
it might not have been the very first one to do it, but
Right.
it was probably the first one to do it and go all in on it like it
Because
did,
they
you know.
lean into it pretty hard, right? They even
Yeah.
acknowledge it at one point when Ed O'Neill starts talking to the camera. He says, "No, me and Garth are the only ones that get to talk to the camera." like they even acknowledge that they're breaking the fourth wall, right?
Right.
Like it's very in your
And
face.
Ed O'Neill, by the way, in this movie is so wonderful.
He is
But it's
amazing.
so
He's
hysterical.
amazing in it. And another thing I wasn't sure how unique or novel was it, but the blatant parodying of like well-known movies and pop culture, like the T2 reference, the Oscar scene, and it flashes across the bottom of the screen. It says, "This is our Oscar scene" or whatever,
Right.
as he's throwing water in his face and pretending to cry. Stuff like that. Like it really, really parodies pop culture itself. I don't know how often that was happening before, almost as like a, part of the humor. It did introduce Queen to a new generation. I distinctly
Hmm.
remember that, even though I was young. I remember, but I feel like nobody was listening to, or it wasn't coming on regular radio, Bohemian Rhapsody, until they did that bit. And suddenly it
Right.
was everywhere, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
You know,
And I mean, I think I read somewhere that like Lorne Michaels really wanted them to use a different song, like
Yep.
something from the 80s, something a little more
Yep.
recent and popular.
I've heard that as well, that the studio and everything wanted them to use something else. And Mike Myers was like, I could be remembering this wrong, but I feel like I've read or heard that it was one of those like deal breakers. Like, no, it
Right.
has to be this song or this bit is not going to work. Like, it's going to be hilarious. And
Right.
thank God he got his way, because that is a classic scene.
Right. Well, it's just they can be so animated singing along with
Right,
it, like with the way the song changes so much.
And the
like,
harmonies and everything, you know?
Right. Yeah. The other thing, like, about that sequence, Dana Carvey has said that, like, he was really annoyed that they, like, used the take that they did because, like, basically he wasn't prepared. Like, he hadn't memorized the lyrics, and he's just, like, barely moving his mouth, and it's not really going along with anything that's being said. So he's, like, he was annoyed by that. But, I mean, it's still, I don't even notice it as I'm watching. It's just,
that's
like,
kind of Garth,
guys.
though. He's not very animated usually. You know?
Right,
he's, like,
right.
quiet and
true.
shy.
Yeah.
Another thing I noticed was like all the blatant foreshadowing, like the cop in the beginning, the security guard, the radio station. And again, I think at one point they even point out, this seems like a very blatant placement of this security guard. I wonder if this will come back up or something like that, Or what, I forget exactly the line, but it's very self-referential throughout the entire movie.
Yeah. There's a whole sequence. I've got to mention this. There's a whole sequence where they reenact the title song to Laverne and Shirley, and they go, and they're skipping along, they run to the fucking factory, they put the glove on the bottle. It's like the whole thing is there, and it's like you wouldn't think it would work still, because like I never watched Laverne and Shirley, but it's
and
like,
that's one of those things I don't think I understood at the time as a kid.
Oh yeah,
but now of
it
course
just
I
seems
get the
silly
reference,
and funny.
Yeah.
And
that might be one of the reasons why it holds up so well for me too, is that as I've gotten older, I've caught other references that I didn't get when I was 10 years old. I just thought it was hilarious. Like one of them that I actually wrote down was when he's interviewing Brian Doyle Murray, their sponsor, Noah of Noah's Arcade. And he writes, "This man blows goats" on the back of the card. And I remember asking my dad, what does that mean? And I don't even remember what he said, but he definitely did not tell me what it he did not tell me the truth.
No,
and it wasn't until like years later where I understood it. And then I was like, oh my God, I can't believe they got away with that in like a PG-13 movie. Like, that's kind of graphic. Like,
yeah, it's a little wild that they got away, because like it had to be like a first time kind of thing. Like, were you down to ratings on this one, or you still got more?
Yeah. I mean, to avoid again just spending 30 minutes quoting the movie, I love this movie. It holds up in every way. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I firmly put this in the S tier. It might be on my Mount Rushmore of all time comedies.
I think obviously I expected that from you, but like the only thing I'll say, I give it an A. The only thing I am not so in love with Tia Carrere. Like I didn't have a thing for her, and maybe it was because I was young enough that it didn't really click in my head or anything.
I think it was around the time where they're shooting the music video, and she's got like that white bikini and the snake around her, where I wrote down Tia Carrere was a goddess.
Yeah, that's really the only thing I'll have to say. Is like I didn't have like somebody to crush on in this movie, because I didn't have a crush on her. So, but other than that, that's about all I got. So, all right, well, that's Wayne's World from 1992, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. See you next time. Brandon at Random Reviews artwork, theme music, and podcast are written, performed, recorded, engineered, directed, and produced by Brandon Griffiths in association with Brandon at Random Reviews Entertainment.